She died, poisoned by energy. But had she known of radium's curious power, would Marie Curie have stopped her research? Or would this double Nobel Prize winner have found a safer way to work? At the 1927 Solvay International Conference held in this library beside the European Parliament, Albert Einstein and Marie Curie discussed the nature of energy. Curie died 7 years later, her fatal illness caused by exposure to radiation. Today, new chapters in the history of energy are still being written. Just as our understanding of nuclear energy was emerging in 1927, so too is the complex reality of shale gas fracking for this generation. Washington and Brussels are still trying to hammer out a TTIP deal. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership has hit every bump on the road. Undeterred, there is a growing lobby for the inclusion of a TTIP energy chapter. Is it likely that energy will be included within TTIP?
Well, I hope so. I am almost sure that it will be the case. We would like even have to quite separate energy chapter because it's so important, but I would like to open the borders between the United States and Europe on LNG before TTIP will start working. So even end of this year, we should take the most important political decision, and next year probably business decisions.
If we don't have an energy chapter, at least we should have provisions that allowed for imports and exports of energy and energy-related products in better conditions that do not exist today, where we still have restrictions on the US side on exports of LNG and a ban on exports of crude oil.
The biggest impediment to any form of energy chapter is the US itself. It has very, very strict restrictions on the export, particularly of crude oil following the 70s oil crisis. Of all the chapters in TTIP, I suspect that's the one that will make the slowest, if any, serious progress.
Last year, MEP Bernd Lang, a rapporteur for the European Parliament's Committee on International Trade, authored a report with recommendations to the European Commission for the TTIP negotiations. In the report, Lang calls for TTIP to ensure that access to raw materials as well as to energy should be granted on a non-discriminatory basis for companies from either the EU or the US.
I come from Denmark. We are very strong in green tech. We have a very big cluster of green tech companies. And I'm sure and convinced that having a chapter in TTIP on energy would also provide opportunities for them in order to export to a huge American market. So I prefer to see the glasses half full rather than half empty on this.
Then came the drill heads. At the World Gas Conference in Paris in June, Europe's fracking restrictions came under attack. The Financial Times reported that chief executives of two of the world's largest oil and gas companies called on Europe's policymakers to re-examine the contentious drilling process. Statoil's ALDE Sather said fracking was currently a lost opportunity for Europe, and Rex Tillerson, chief executive of ExxonMobil, said that Europe could see a natural gas renaissance similar to the United States if governments such as France and Germany allowed fracking to go ahead.
I really don't think we know enough about the fracking technology to say that it's safe, but the most important thing from my point of view is that we need to be keeping much more fossil fuel in the ground if we're going to seriously tackle climate change.
In terms of safety, Tillerson said, in total, 2 million wells in the US and Canada have been safely fracked. In his view, that's enough data. But last year, the Wall Street Journal reported Tillerson had joined a lawsuit with his neighbours to block construction of a water tower, saying it is illegal and would create a noise nuisance and traffic hazards, in part because it would provide water for use in fracking, which requires heavy trucks to haul and pump massive amounts of water. An audacious case of not in my backyard.
It's really quite a heavy impact on local communities. I think the thing that people haven't thought about is that actually we're much more densely populated in Europe, and in order to get the gas out of the ground you have to have massive injections of water and chemicals, so that can affect our water tables. You also have the trucks passing through local communities, so it's a really intense local environmental impact. And then we also have the release of methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas, which is an inevitable byproduct of fracking.
to say that we have to frack, I think there's also no basis, because I'm not a geologist. I'm not an economist in a large gas company. It's up to the economists and the geologists to decide, is this a viable resource? But we as politicians should not be putting hurdles to that.
You're a geologist by trade. What do you think of fracking?
Well, the technology has been around for quite some time. If we look to the North Sea now, we are now recovering the remnants in some of the oil fields using processes which are, frankly, fracking. In the UK, we have done a number of tests in fracking as well. So we have amongst the highest standards in terms of our hydrocarbon recovery in the world. And I believe right now in the UK, we can recover gas and we can recover oil from underneath our feet.
Last year, the United States became the world's largest oil producer. The US banned oil exports in 1973 in response to an embargo by Arab countries. But in May this year, Reuters reported analyst views that the US Congress could lift the 40-year ban on domestic crude oil exports as soon as next year. On June the 23rd this year, the United States Department of Energy granted 7 long-term export licenses to export liquid natural gas. Europe wants the gas, and it wants it now.
If Europe can change its imports from primarily Russian to diversification, including the US, that would be very good for European industry, because what it would do is it would introduce more competition to Russian gas, in a sense putting a ceiling on Russia's gas price, which is good for everyone.
Poland has been trying to develop a closer relationship with the United States in terms of bringing LNG and fracked gas into Poland. What stage are the negotiations at the moment?
I was not only Poland, because I started US-EU LNG round table 3 weeks ago in the European Parliament. It is open for whole Europe, our LNG import. The most important topic is to open the export from the United States, because the licenses are, well, difficult to obtain.
Why would countries like Poland, Lithuania be so much in favour of LNG being imported?
I think it is a question of the geopolitics and geoeconomy, with a very tense bilateral relationship between Poland and the Russian Federation. The questions of the Ukraine is playing a dominant role in this relationship.
We're in a much more unstable geopolitical world, and a lot of that is now around the energy question. We in the EU are wholly reliant upon Russia for most of our gas imports. We're reliant upon the Middle East for most of our oil imports. We're reliant upon the 2 most unstable parts of the globe.
Russia remains an important supplier and will continue to be an important supplier, but we need to find alternatives also to make sure that we have more competition in the market, and that has an impact also on the prices.
To link economies can contribute to development, peace at the continent. So I wouldn't even say that the cutting off the supplies from Russia would be a mistake. So I will be in favor of having a continuation of energy supply from the Russian Federation.
We foresaw in the Energy Union strategy that was adopted end of February, endorsed by the European Council in March. We already foresaw in that strategy that we will want to look into LNG. We are currently, the Commission is preparing an LNG strategy, which was foreseen in the work program for 2015-2016. Work is currently underway, and hopefully we will have a good LNG strategy sometime soon.
We contacted several oil and gas companies for interview on the record. All declined or failed to respond. Though unable to provide a spokesperson, BP did respond with comment from its chief executive, Bob Dudley. In June, Dudley said, in the US, the majority of the big shale growth areas are low population density. These factors are very different in Europe. Imagine how disruptive fracking would be for ExxonMobil's Rex Tillerson living in densely populated Europe. Is there likely to be a TTIP energy chapter?
We all know that in Europe we are looking for diversification of our energy supply. Now we have to look to either the Middle East or Russia, and both of them are not always reliable, as we know. So it would be good that there would be a lift on the ban of the export of the energy sources of the states towards Europe. It would help to get gas and other fossil fuels for the time being. In the long run, I think we should use that energy chapter to make sure that we all go for the same climate goals, and that means the end of fossil fuels and the introduction fully of renewable energy. And in that sense, Europe can play a vital role.
I don't think politicians should be the one deciding should we be doing fracking or should we not. I think that should be the market forces combined with environmental considerations. What I see as problematic is that in Europe there are some countries such as France which prohibit even the exploration. And I think that's wrong-headed. I think we as politicians should be technology neutral and resource neutral. We should lay the groundworks. If you're going to go for any kind of energy source, there are certain environmental considerations, but we should let the market decide.
Importing fracked gas leaves Europe compromised by hypocrisy. We're offshoring environmental risk. A TTIP energy chapter is still far from certain. The importation of US shale gas is just around the corner, but until Europe can manage its own energy supply more efficiently and effectively, it will remain at the mercy of geopolitics. Is it time to think as Marie Curie would have thought? We have seen the poisoning of our environment, so should we stop? Or should we follow the science and stand on the shoulders of giants?